Welcome, everyone. My name's Dallas. You're listening to VicFoodStories, and this is the place where we talk about food in and around Victoria, British Columbia. But in today's case, we're going to be talking about a lot more than that. I'm here with the guys from Spinnakers, Paul and Paddy.
Hi.
How you guys doing?
Good, doing good. Excited.
I got to say, because I've already been talking to Paul now for a couple hours here, and I knew that you guys did a lot, but I didn't even have any idea of what all you guys are doing. Because it's insane, all the different avenues that Spinnakers is now involved in and all the amazing products that are being pumped out.
I think we kind of forget what's all going on sometimes too.
Well, I guess for me coming in from the outside and sort of looking at it all, I'm like, how are you doing this? And so you poured something here to start off. And what is this that we have here to drink?
This is one of our brewer, Leva, our Belgian brewer. She came in. This is a IPA that we put into a rum barrel on Christmas Eve last year. So it's been sitting in there for almost a year now. And as we just had a sip there, we're just saying there's a lot of wood. It tastes very, very woody on this one, which is kind of nice.
So when somebody is trying beer, what are the things they're looking out for? Because I'm just disclaimer, I'm a full novice at beer. I know nothing, so I'm going to ask a bunch of weird questions probably.
No, that's it. No dumb questions.
But so what are you looking for when you're actually trying something?
Well, this is kind of I guess a challenging place to start with something that is so complex.
Yeah.
So, back in the beginning, we used to say beer's a beer because they all tasted the same and they're made by a couple of multinational companies and they were differentiated by packaging and label color and so forth. They tasted the same. So Spinnakers was conceived as an opportunity to create some beers with flavor. And so in the early days, we made English style beers. And so those beers tended to be lower carbonation, maltier, hoppier. They had a nose on them. And it wanted to draw parallels with, say, the kinds of language and procedures that one goes through in tasting wines. And then after a while, beers became more plentiful from more different sources. And it's really the home brewers who brought so much diversity to the game, to the point that as beer has evolved over the last 36 years in North America, we've got to the point where we originally needed to make beers that were on style. And so the styles were based on the benchmarks that came out of UK and Europe. So one would always go back to what is a Pils supposed to taste like? And so you go back to some Czechoslovakian Pilsners and say, that's the benchmark. That's what you're trying to make. And after a while, people get accomplished at making styles the way they were supposed to be. And then we as North Americans who crave diversity live in a land of freedom. And so we look upon the English, European, UK styles as the benchmarks of the styles. And then we look at the people who are brewers there as the guardians, the keepers of the styles. And their job is to make the same beer day in, day out, year after year. And at their end of their career, they hand it on to the next in line who continues the process of making the same beer. As North Americans, we are not bound by those traditions. And we, as I said, live in a land of freedom and opportunity. So we, having accomplished the process of being able to make a solid beer on style, we then decide how we want to change it up, how we want to make it ours, how we want to make it part of where we come from, part of who we are. And so in the face of globalization, what you're seeing happening in North America today is a regionalization. And so we have India Pale Ale as an example, as a beer that was made in UK, that traveled to India It had lots of alcohol as a preservative. It had lots of hops, another preservative. And so it enabled this barrel of beer on a boat to cross the equator a couple of times and end up in India, where the troops, the expats, recognized it as beer. It was different than what they probably had before because of what the rigors that had been through, but it became an internationally acknowledged, cherished style of beer. So you take that beer and you bring it into the North American context, and then it kind of took off in California. No, let's back up a bit. It took off in the Pacific Northwest. Yeah. And in the Pacific Northwest, we live on the edge of the hop fields. There were great hop fields in the Fraser Valley around Chilliwack, today Yakima, the Willamette Valley in Oregon. And so because of this access to hops and different varietals of hops than what were being grown on the other side of the Atlantic, the hops of the Cascade region, the Cascade hops, the Chinook hops and so forth, all had these grapefruity, citrusy kinds of notes to them, characteristics, which are just so different than the noble old world varietals. And we all became hopheads in the Pacific Northwest.
So I was going to ask, and you'd mentioned earlier today when we were talking about hops was like really a West Coast thing.
Yeah.
That's kind of like hops is really talked about here.
Yeah.
But not necessarily elsewhere.
Yeah. And so we went through this phase of what I would characterize as Northwest ales. And we made a beer here called Northwest Ale for a long time. And it was our take on what the Americans were calling IPA. And in my language, it was not an IPA. The IPA was what was coming out of UK and did the voyage, and it was that kind of traditional beer. So we got these crazy kinds of IPAs happening in the Pacific Northwest, which were then overtaken by kind of the San Diego school, where the contest became one of how many hops can we stuff into a bottle or a can, and at the end of the day, how undrinkable can we make it?
I'm kind of a fan of that,
its like ridiculous abundance of hops. And then the next phase that came along was New England, and brewers, I guess, starting in Vermont, started to produce these much more delicate, much more drinkable, hazy IPAs with all these kind of tropical notes to them. So again, it's like a beer is a beer is a beer is a beer. They're all called IPAs, which is what this thing that's in the glass also is. But it came out of a barrel and is done in a much more traditional kind of Belgian style. So that beer is a beer is a beer is no longer.
It can't be because
beer can be anything now.
Yeah.
The aftertaste on this is great. It's like stayed with me for quite a while, and I really enjoy it.
Quite complex on that one.
But that's way different than, like, I would say even any other beer that I've had.
Yeah.
The aftertaste on this is very different.
Yeah.
It's there's a beer for everyone. It's that classic saying where somebody's like, I don't like IPAs or I don't like lagers. Well, you just haven't found one that suited you, that type of thing. And especially with these more complex beers, where being kind of a rookie or a new to beer, that's great that you enjoy that, because it is a very challenging and complex type of flavor profile on that one.
I think there is more definitely to sort of sit and ponder almost.
Yeah,
there's a lot of flavor compounds that come out of wood. Cal and I yesterday sat through a tasting of whiskeys that were made by New Caledonia towards the peninsula, and making whiskeys is an intriguing process, especially in light of this IPA, in that you're taking a raw spirit and you're putting it in a barrel, and you're asking that spirit to leach out of the barrel color and tannins and flavor compounds, which ultimately, over a period of 12, 18, 20 years, becomes cherished for what it is as a whiskey. Mm-hmm. And in the same way that craft beer has changed what beer is in the last 35 years. Craft spirits, craft distilling is changing the way we perceive spirits today. So these things that we were tasting yesterday would be, in a blind tasting, recognized as being 12, 18 years old. They're actually 18 to 36 months old. And it's just understanding technology in the modern world and how to manage all of these different opportunities that we have to bring flavor into the glass.
So what does craft beer mean to you? Like, what does that term mean? Like, because I don't know the difference. If someone says craft versus just regular beer.
To me, craft beer is beer that is brewed by passionate, hands-on brewers at a small scale, and is the antithesis of industrial beer, where making every can or every bottle from whichever production facility, wherever in the world, tastes the same. Yeah. We cherish diversity, and we celebrate diversity, and we collaborate with each other from brewery to brewery to create more diversity. And one of the things that I absolutely feel best about in terms of what craft beer is and craft brewers are, is that we collaborate. We're all friends. We work with each other. We help each other. If somebody needs something, it's here, borrow mine. And we are the opposite again of that industrial process where we harbor secrets and we try to do end runs on our competition. And so craft beer now is absolutely accessible, approachable. If you don't like that one, here, try this one. Yeah. And we're very, very much at a point where, as a consumer going into a liquor store, it's no longer acceptable for people who work in liquor stores to be clerks who pick up a product, scan it past the barcode, drop it in a bag, and take your money. They actually have to know what they have in the store so that anybody can walk in and say, hey, I like this beer. What have you got? Mm-hmm. And people can then guide them and make help them make some good choices that will get them into what they like.
What would you guys say goes into a really good beer? Just in general, is there something that you could sort of say?
Classic, say great ingredients, but it's passion. And like depending, the best beers are the ones that the brewers and the production people are excited about. They want to try making this. They want to be drinking this. I always found that the best beers are the ones that the brewers want to drink.
How does that translate through into the beer? Like, how can you tell that that's the case?
From that whole process from grain to glass, there's a lot of attention to detail, and the little change here, a little tweak here can change the whole beer completely off. So it's when you know that this is the flavor I want to end up with, it's that attention to detail, and that comes back to that passion of paying attention and being diligent along the way. So this product is perfect and exactly where you want it. And of course, using great ingredients and, all that.
Oh, it doesn't hurt, right?
Yeah.
And when someone says the term microbrewery, what does that mean versus this like a brewery?
Bigger than us,
Bigger than us, smaller than us.
Yeah, somewhere in the middle. Yeah.
I'd say microbrewery is kind of an archaic term at this point. We're all craft brewers. We all hold the same licenses. We just function at different scales.
There's 1,000 ways to skin a cat in beer. It's like you can brew systems are different from everyone. Ours is, like I said, saying 35 plus years old, but sure, it may not be as technologically advanced as some of the other ones, but we can do everything just the same. It's just a different way up that hill.
100%. And when I was in Japan in January, we got a couple tours of a couple of sake producers, and seeing that so one of them was legitimately, if you went in there, it looked like a science lab. Yeah. It was, they had the different rooms. It was wild. They had water coming from Mount Fuji out in like the showroom where you could buy product. They had this little thing where you could just walk up with a glass and drink water from Mount Fuji. And like that place was really cool. Then we went to this other one and it looked a lot more like a beer, like distillery. Like it was, or a brewery. It was it was pretty wild to see how they were radically different.
Mhm.
And so you find that as well with beer producers?
Absolutely.
No question.
It's
And you're finding that as well in craft distilleries.
Yep.
The range is phenomenal.
just same dance steps, just a different song, really.
So do you guys get to travel much and like visit other breweries and see how they do things?
Yep. We on my side of things as a brewer, I'm friends with a lot of the brewers in town and in Vancouver and such. So we do absolutely talk and hang out and have beers and discuss the trade. And like Paul said, it's really, our industry is really based on that collaboration between everybody. It's us against the big guys. So there is always open conversation, exchanging of, not products, but of course products too, but ingredients and ideas and thoughts and like that.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I would suggest that brewers don't shake hands. They reach out with a glass full of beer.
Yeah.
And say, here, try this.
Yeah.
That's always a good first step.
Yeah.
You betcha.
And for people that don't know, Spinnakers is the oldest microbrewery or I guess craft brewery, I'll say, and brewpub in Canada.
We're the oldest brewpub in Canada.
Yeah. And for people who don't know that is the case.
Yes.
And it was interesting that when I was reading, like before Spinnakers opened, it was illegal to brew beer and sell beer in the same
On
place.
premises, yeah.
Yes.
Which is that was pretty wild for me to read about being in 2020, where it's very different now. And I guess when you guys opened, there were some challenges with the initial opening. If that was the case, eh?
We went through this period of what I just have always characterized as pig-headed determination. That we are going to do this, and to any authority who suggested that maybe that was a problem, my response was, I'm sorry, you don't understand what we're doing, and we need you to bear with us, and we will show you that what we're doing is not a problem, but you simply don't understand what we're doing. And
what was the viewpoint from the other side that they wanted to like not have this happen?
That's the way it always was.
Okay.
And the industry was always previously controlled by the multinationals. And the regulatory authorities had completely lost sight of small scale producers. And so it wasn't just the regulatory authorities in terms of excise or liquor control and licensing, but it was also to do with building code issues and so forth. Just all factors.
I guess there would have had to be a new things like laws put in place to be able for this to happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, for example, the day I walked into City Hall in Victoria to suggest that we would like to build a brew pub in Victoria, the individual at the counter of the planning department just said, "Oh, we don't allow those here." So I thanked her very much for her time and turned around and walked away. And back in those days, we didn't have cell phones, so I started pumping quarters into the payphone in the lobby at City Hall and started phoning people on council saying, "What's up? Why not?" And after a few hours on the phone, like what I essentially learned was that the city would entertain a well-founded proposal from a credible group of people. And when I asked, what's the problem here? Nobody wants your pub in their backyard. So it was a NIMBY thing. And the advice I was given was go find a neighborhood that doesn't exist and build your brew pub there, and the neighbors can move in around it and they won't complain to us. So there we are on the waterfront in Vic West, because it was a downtrodden neighborhood on the wrong side of the bridge. And it was derelict industrial land all around us.
I was going to ask about the location, what the significance of it was.
Waterfront, south facing, Inner Harbor.
Because that location, like eating out on the patio today, is just like, that's insane. It's so nice.
One of my first days on that property was in February in 1983. And it was one of those glorious February days, much like today. And there was a little tiny balcony on the upper floor. And I sat there and I could see Race Rocks. And I went, wouldn't that be cool to sit here and drink beer and watch the sailboats return on Swift Shore weekend? Hence the name Spinnakers.
So what was the original mission statement with Spinnakers when you were launching it or opening it?
Sorry, the what?
The original mission statement.
Make beer.
Yeah. Drink a beer.
Make beer. We very much wanted to create a public living room. My partner was very much into the concept of the English pub. I did not want us to recreate an English pub, but wanted to do a pub that had those kinds of qualities, but respected where we were on the West Coast, on the waterfront, and be current with, at that time was the mid 1980s. So, hence south facing terrace. Nobody had patios before we did patio in Victoria. Bars were hotel basements or back lots, windowless. And so we fought through the regulations on all that kind of stuff and basically created a wall of windows facing the harbor. And all of that was breakthrough stuff at the time.
And how did people react to that when you did that?
The day we finally got our license, the liquor inspector came in the morning at 11. He interviewed us and deemed that we were suitable characters and that the place had all the pieces in place that it needed to have.
What was the test for that?
Able to be opened. And he then called back at 2 and said, "Hey, your license is ready if you guys want to come and pick it up," which shocked all of us. So John took off for the liquor store. Ray took off to the bank to get some money for a float. And I tried to make sure all the lights were working and shit like that. And we opened at 4:00. And again, without cell phones, we filled up immediately and we sold $1,200 that night. And that was our worst day ever until we had a fire.
Really?
So it was well received to the point, and people were waiting for it. People were waiting for the beers that we wanted to make. They're waiting for the room. And I think they were kind of surprised by the kitchen. And back in those days, pubs and bars didn't have kitchens. They had hot dogs, ubiquitous meat thing going around on a thing, and bags of chips off the back bar.
Yeah,
They
because
didn't do food.
for people that don't know, Spinnakers has been doing farm to table since the 80s. Since you first opened.
Since about 1990. Yeah.
Oh, 90, okay.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of places that I had seen that failed in the 90s and then 2000s trying to do that. And for whatever reason, it didn't work. So it's amazing to me that Spinnakers for 30 years now has been doing that. And it's just, you figured something out.
Yeah, and part of it is perhaps my architect background, and I am paranoid of liability. And the best form of liability insurance is have a couple of pints of beer and have a substantial meal and you're done. And it's on to the next place, and let's bring somebody else in and put them in that seat.
So before we get into the beer making, let's go back to the actual origin story of Spinnakers. How did it actually become an idea and then actually become a thing?
John Mitchell had been an advocate of trying to get better beer into British Columbia for a number of years. John, born in Singapore, grew up in UK, in hospitality in UK and France. He bartended at the Savoy. He moved to Vancouver, was one of the first bartenders at the Hotel Georgia when liquor licenses started to get passed out in the early 50s. He became kind of resident bartender at the Sylvia on English Bay. And in the late 70s, he partnered into the Troller Pub in Horseshoe Bay. And it was his frustration with the lack of quality beer had him haranguing people in liquor control and licensing. And there was also this ongoing set of brewery strikes that became kind of the norm back in those days. And so the breweries worker, Local 40, every other summer would go on strike for a new contract. And I think government just finally got frustrated. And with the advent of oncoming strike, kind of threw it out to John, said, okay, you want to do this brewery, how quickly can you get it open? And so he scrambled to put a brewery together, which went into an outbuilding on the dock at Sewell's Marina down the road from the Troller Pub in Horseshoe Bay. And he conscripted some support from a guy named Frank Appleton, who in, I think, 78 had written an article about homebrewing in Harrowsmith magazine. So John had read this article, he found a copy of it, went and found Frank up in the Kootenays. Frank was a disaffected Carling's brewer. He quit in disgust over what they were doing and basically went and hung out in the Kootenays. So John found him and they threw together what became the Horseshoe Bay Brewery, refashioned dairy equipment, suffered greatly in terms of the ability to manage quality control and consistency. So if you think about a new beverage sector coming to life and you're challenged in terms of quality control and consistency against a marketplace that is very, very good at making consistent product, it's a recipe for failure. So John, recognizing that he had a problem, having opened his brewery in June of 82, by September 82, was on his way to UK in search of better equipment. He returned with some ideas on equipment, and he had a suitcase full of beer. And I, having found out about what John had done, living in Vancouver at the time, paid a little bit of attention to what he was doing. And then I came over to Victoria and did the rounds and looked at what would need to happen to see if we could maybe entice John to come to Victoria and build something from scratch. The eureka moment for me happened when we got into a tasting of John's beers that he brought back. And it was a gathering at a place called the Pickled Onion, which was a pub in a liquor agent's basement out in Dunbar area up by UBC. And John had gathered together, along with Fern DeMonte, who owned the place, a collection of half a dozen other characters who were beer aficionados. And so along with some boards of pickles and cheese and a bunch of bread, we set about drinking all of John's beer that night. He had 2 bottles each of 14 different kinds of beer. We drank them. These other guys had notebooks. They talked to each other. They scribbled notes. They challenged each other over what they thought was actually in the beers, all of which was completely foreign conversation to me. And then we got into half a dozen beers that were North American beers that one of the guys had brought in. And then we got into the homebrew that these people had brought in their 20-liter canisters and served via a dispensing system at the bar. And 2 things became abundantly clear to me that night. First of all, here's this extraordinary range of flavors that were not available in our marketplace, short of crossing the pond and going over to Europe or UK. We had no access to any of these kinds of flavors. And secondly, I thought the best beer that we drank that night was made by the homebrewers. And that told me that we had the technology in the room that night to do this thing.
That must have been a wild, like, sort of aha moment.
And it was absolutely an aha. It's like reach up and just turn the light bulb on.
Yeah.
And I set to work the next day on what became an 18-month process to make it happen.
So that was the day where it all
That was the day. That was like the light bulb moment.
And so the building that you guys are in, did you build that?
No, there was a house there.
Okay. So there was already a house there, and then how much have you added onto it?
Almost all of it.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
The main floor plate between where the staircase is that goes up and where the steps are that go down onto the lower part of the lower floor is the old main floor plate.
Okay.
There's a a grotty basement that I just didn't have the jam to tell the planning department that we're going to bring in the D9 and just blow it away and start from scratch. I just thought a renovation would be much easier to pull off politically. And so that's what we did. And then from my travels, I was particularly enamored with the design language of, there was a field house in Kuala Lumpur that I just like, wow, that was just, to me, such a really cool building. And it was one of these big folded roof episodes. And so that's what I kind of wanted to do here, to take this roof and fold it over a much larger building than it looked like from the outside. And again, there's politics in there we need to build this thing bigger than we're allowed to. And we need to kind of hide the fact that it is, and do it in a very West Coast kind of feel.
I do love the fact that you keep coming back to the fact that like we're on the West Coast.
Yeah.
And you're trying to be authentic to the West Coast with what you do. And I really appreciate that. When we look at beer,
well, I think that's who we are. And I think it follows all the way through everything that we do, even through to today.
Absolutely.
I mean, today we're making gin that's a West Coast London dry. And it's just, we live in an amazing place. And one of the best journeys for me has been able to watch Southern Vancouver Island unfold as a food region. I didn't know it when we started doing it. I didn't know that we were artisan brewers until a few years later when we discovered the word artisan to what we do.
Yeah.
And the notion of running an artisan kitchen was so logical. And then the agriculture sector on Southern Vancouver Island kind of followed along with us as we discovered things that would grow well here in our sub-Mediterranean climate, and allowed us on Southern Vancouver Island to absolutely blossom as a food region, to the point that Slow Food recognizes Cowichan as a slow city. I went to Torino, I went to Slow Food to find out what this movement was all about. Spent a day, went, yeah, this is what we do. Let's go down to Positano and hit the beach. What we're doing was just right. It was right for the time. It was right opportunity, and we just had some amazing encounters with people who grow stuff for us. It's community, it's connection, it's who we are, it's where we live.
One of the big things I've learned through meeting you today is just how open you are to new ideas and questioning sort of, well, this is the way things might have been up till now, or like, what if you do this differently? What does that look like? And I think that's pretty wild, and it's really cool to learn that Spinnakers like that is coming from the top down, and it makes sense now seeing how much you guys do. And that's how receptive you are to new ideas.
It's always been, I've been a spinner a couple of years now, and it's always been that way, which has always been very nice. It's very encouraging to be able to have an idea, being able to think it out and pitch it, and it be received, and be able to talk it out. And Paul and everybody at Spinnakers has always been very, very good and very open-minded to new ideas and pushing the limit, if you will, to what we think is traditional and normal, which is great. Especially in the craft beer industry, where people are throwing everything they can into a beer, from anything they can into a beer, really. So, which is fun.
100%. And like, we're sitting in the room right now where a lot of beer is aging, and it's Paul. I think you said that there's a lot of tools here, because when you start blending, there's a lot of possibilities to go on.
Absolutely.
When you start mixing stuff together, and when you are blending, I guess, is it just experience that you have to know that, like, well, what if I blend that one with this thing? Or is it just like sort of guessing, or?
It's really up a lot on the palate. And the big difference, everybody has a different palate. And that's one thing I've learned as a brewer. And, like I picture what I would like to think of what I'm picturing, what I'm tasting, and you'll give it to somebody else and they'll have completely different sensory to this. In our brewery, we're very lucky to have Leva Peters from Belgium, who ran worked at a couple breweries in Belgium there, and is a very, very knowledgeable on our barrel program. So we trust her palate quite a bit. And when she goes through blending, she'll look for things of taking the better barrel, like the best product of the barrel, and blend it with this to get maybe more of a tannin note, more of a fruit note, or a souring. So it's kind of, I believe she's picturing where she wants this end flavor profile to be. Or she's just kind of saying, I like this. This is what people will like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, I would say is usually the case, probably.
Yeah. Yeah. We haven't gotten too much for bad new rap yet. So,
so when we look at the process of actually making beer.
Oh, yeah.
We can take a break for a second.
Just looking for a bottle opener.
And so what's that one?
This is a good example of Leva's work. This is our framboise. And so this is a traditional red ale, lambic style. So it's very Belgian, I'm just rambling at this point. So it's a very traditional style of beer where it is a red ale that is put into a barrel to be soured through over time, but then blended in with fresh raspberries. And so it'll do its souring process in the barrel, picking up those flavors, and then add it on. Like today, we were talking about the grapes that she added into a barrel. She has hundreds of pounds of raspberries into the barrels to absorb that flavor, kick up another type of fermentation, and go for that. So this one is one that I think she's quite good at and has been doing for a couple of years now, and it's one that we continually do. So reach over here, I'll pour you a little.
Here, I'll clean out my glass here. Okay, and so like trying this one, what are you looking for when you're trying this to really pick up and sort of appreciate it?
What I look for in a framboise, and just what I like about her is it's going to have a complex flavor, but a very fresh brightness to it too from those raspberries. It's something that you could sit and kind of chew on, if you will, but also have on a hot summer day at the same time. There's this very fresh raspberry kick to it. Definitely on the nose. Lots of almost like a jam. Very
100% jam.
Yeah, yeah,
100%.
And having that quite tart and dry finish, it's very refreshing and makes you want to have another sip of it.
100%. How long has that been out?
I believe that. Oh, this one's been out. We've done a couple runs of this one.
Okay.
But usually for that one's about a year and a half to make, because it'll sit in the barrel for about a year and then about 6 to 8 months on the raspberries after that.
So when you right before you put it in the barrel, what's the difference in the flavor profile of that versus what we're having right now? How does it change over time?
You'll still have that very that tart, the sour, that kind of dryness, but that obviously that big jam raspberry notes on the nose and at the back end, kind of almost juiciness are coming from the raspberries for sure. And that's not like a blending in; they're just resting on those. But we say resting, we're just sitting in the barrel with them and absorbing it. Yeah. And
with the process of making beer, like the very first step of the whole thing is the it was the barley, right?
Yeah.
So in Spinnakers, there's that little machinery upstairs there, or whatever.
The mill upstairs, yeah.
Which that's the start of all the beers that come out of Spinnakers. And that was the wildest thing to me, that piece of machinery that's in a publicly accessible area is the start of everything.
Yeah.
And that's pretty wild. That same exact piece of machinery has been all these years, has been doing everything.
I was thinking about it the other day as I was milling, putting some in. Today we brewed the 7,618th brew that Spinnakers has done.
Do you have a logbook of what each one is?
Absolutely. Legally, yes. Yeah.
Oh, you have to.
If the government is listening, yes, we have every one of those on there.
Oh,
yes.
that's cool.
We have to do that legally, but you want to do that as a brewer to have notes on, to go back on and see there's temperature change here. We did something different here. So you can go back to refer, why does this beer taste really good? Or why does this beer taste really bad? We can trace it back to those steps along the way.
So you can actually, the whole process is documented.
Yeah.
So you can go back and if the last rendition was technically or you feel better.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah. And it changes as it goes, but it's kind of fun. I was looking through previous logs a couple months back and just going back see how far back I could trace. And that it's really neat to see there's a little joke that calls Spinnakers Brewers University. There's been a lot of really great brewers have started here and come and gone on to create and do bigger things. Matt Phillips being one of the most recognizable names out of that. So it's kind of cool. And like John Mitchell, of course, one of the godfathers of grain, we call it. But and going back,
and after John, it was Brad McQuay who went on to set up Newland Systems and became like the premier manufacturer of craft brewing and distilling equipment in North America.
Wow.
And then most recently, Matt Westpatrick from Whistlebuoy. He'd started at Spinnakers with us and then opened up that one down there, and they're killing it.
Yeah, they're doing great stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
They have
great stuff.
the food truck, the Los, I forget the second name.
Yeah, the Lampanada place there. Yeah.
Those things are so good.
It's deadly. But yeah, so it's really cool, and kind of going back to those notes, and then you go back and you see the lineage, the hair, like the history that goes into these things, and also very fun just to be like, today I brewed a nut brown. It's the same recipe from 36 years ago that John Mitchell came up, seeing how many other people have done that, and coming back to the mill. It's really fun. After 7,600 brews, you can averagely say maybe 100 to 200 kilograms of grain goes into a brew for our system. Mm-hmm. You can only imagine how much weight has gone through that mill over 7,600 brews. Like, it's seen if that mill could talk. For sure.
100%. And it's never broken down.
Never had a problem with it. It's made a lot of noises. It's made a lot of squeaky noises for sure.
That was the first question I had. Is this thing ever broken down? Because it's just a workhorse.
Yeah. Had a few nuts and bolts through it.
Yeah. Lots of zap straps, but it's still there. It's
What's the coolest part about brewing beer, in your guys' opinion?
Drinking it.
Yeah. That's being a beer fan, being able to make a beer that I want to drink. Also, something I've learned as a brewer in the past couple of years is the picturing a flavor. I don't know how you describe that, or
envisioning.
Envisioning a flavor of something. It's like trying to see a color you haven't seen, but then knowing the steps to try and get that, and having that problem solving, and then you do achieve, may or may not, but hopefully you do achieve this goal, and then you have something beautiful.
Yeah,
that I can get silly with my friends with. So it's pretty, which is quite nice.
Are there any common misconceptions about beer that you would like to sort of comment on? Like one for me is, should there be an expectation of judgment on the flavor based on the color? Because I feel like you can't. Like,
no,
you can't.
Not anymore, especially. Yeah. It's that classic. I don't like Guinness. It's so heavy. But for Guinness is an incredibly light beer overall. But it's that thick black perception that people are, that must be like molasses. But at 4.2%, it's an incredibly light beer.
I think one of the most fun things is for those who say, I don't like beer.
Yeah.
It's simply you haven't found the beer that you like yet.
Absolutely.
So can I take you down some flavor pathway and find your style?
I feel like that's the case with a lot of things.
Yeah.
People just say a blanket statement, but for someone that actually knows what that thing is, it's kind of hard to just like throw it all under the same umbrella.
And it kind of ties back into that. I don't like hops. I don't like especially like going back, like, of course, through the generations of IPA, they went from exploring the flavor to being bitter bombs that would, your mouth would suck inwards after you drank it, to stuff where these hazies and these New England IPAs are coming out, and totally, they're not bitter, but they're using just as much or more hops than you would use in a very bitter IPA, but just the different technique of it. And you're achieving these crazy flavors and smells and
lots of tropical flavors,
yeah,
tropical influences, which are being bred into hops that were not there 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Weren't really there 10 years ago.
It looks like there's one of the hot new hops that people are using are like a Sabro hop, and it's a Mexican based hop there, and they're creating their whole new flavors and strains down there, which bringing up totally different usages for brewers.
And so when you are going to brew something, where do the ideas come from when you're setting out to be like, okay, I want to make this?
Sometimes it's the name of the beer and trying to create a beer for something funny, but it's also just depending on season, what ingredients you have available, i.e. fruits and what's growing around at the time.
And I guess does everything need to be treated differently in the process depending on what you're putting in?
Yeah.
Or is it generally like the same kind of thing? Or do you have to do is there a pretty big range of how you treat stuff?
And that's kind of goes back to that thing where we're talking about was it the Reichstag log? I forget the name, how you pronounce that in German, but you have these 4 ingredients and quite like the mixing board we're sitting in front of us, it's how you manipulate them. And you push up on this end, you raise this temperature at this time, it's going to make a flavor here. But if you lower your temperature at this time and let it sit longer here, it's going to make a different compound there. So using these 4 very basic ingredients and manipulating them, and it takes 1,000 mashes to understand that. And then you just kind of tweak and play. It's very much like a music, if you will.
Yeah, you're absolutely composing.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, and it's fun, which what I always find is fun as a brewer. And like we're sitting in this barrel room, is what I do when I'm mashing in will make the slightest effect will make an effect 2 years down the road. And I can't really taste it until then to find out. But that goes back to that passion and due diligence of being very mindful of every little step along the way. And that's what makes great craft beer.
And I guess over time, you kind of get a feel for if you do this little tiny tweak at one point, it's going to produce this thing at the end. And I want that thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just learning how you tweak the grain, the water, the hops, the yeast. Each one of them is such a large playground to be going through and manipulating. So it's fun because you'll spend all this time doing, okay, I'm going to make this pseudo amber ale. And then you plan it all out and then, didn't really get to where I want. So you goes back to those documenting all those brew notes. And okay, so what do we do? Well, maybe next time I'll ferment at a little higher temperature to get more fruit flavor out of it or esters out of it, and kind of just manipulating. And like I said, it takes about 1,000 mashes to really fully start to understand those and getting through and how you get to taste that flavor that you envision.
And so the mashing, that's stage 2?
That's number 1. That's
the first one.
Right after that mill, it goes in, and that was that big mash tun we were looking at with the grated bottom.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's all very temperature driven. And like I said, those little effects that you do there echo for years after, which is really kind of fun.
And with beer, what's the proper way to pour it?
Depends on the beer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, so it depends on the beer.
Absolutely. Every beer will have a different.
Yeah. So you take this beer we're drinking right now.
Yeah.
And it's been in this bottle for a while. It was bottle conditioned. So that means that there was a fermentation in the bottle. So that means that there's yeast has settled to the bottom. So you want to pour it and not pour the yeast in unless you actually want to taste the yeast. So this is one that's going to be poured carefully, slowly. And as you move from glass to glass, you don't really want to slosh it back down again because you're just going to mix up the yeast. So that's kind of like really sensitive at that end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum, you've got a beer that's nitro.
I was going to ask about nitro.
So you just want to turn that bottle upside down and just let it flow.
Yeah.
Because that way you're going to get the kind of cascade that you want. And, the whole nitro thing is like a Guinness invention to...
God bless them for that.
resemble a perfectly cask conditioned beer. And so, cask beer is in small barrels, and there's some little ones over there. They're about the size of what a normal cask is. And the beers are secondary fermented inside the cask. So the carbonation is much finer. It's much smoother, with an opportunity to put some dry hopping on it at the finish. And typically these are either dispensed by gravity, that is, open the tap and let it flow into your glass, or by hand pump beer engine off of the bar. And either way, what you want to try to create is a circumstance where you get this nice fat head that sits up on top of the beer. And I was saying earlier that we've got some bottle fermented IPAs and ESBs coming. And again, it's the same kind of thing. We're trying to get that fat head that just follows all the way down and diminishes until you get to the bottom. And then with each sip, it's going to leave a lace line around the glass. So you can actually count the number of times that you put it up to your mouth.
Oh,
To me, that is a well-conditioned beer.
That's the
And
Guinness.
so,
effect.
you're playing with pouring depending upon what's in there.
and so
If
there.
it's just like an industrial lager, it's like, go for it.
And you said so. There's IPA, and what was the other kind that you said?
ESB,
Yeah. So what is that?
extra special bitter,
Okay.
which is classic English pub beer.
Your classic, yeah.
And in our case, we named it after John Mitchell. And it's a beer that we've been making since the day we served our first beer. And it's just, we're kind of known for it.
It's kind of whatever. Like, I personally think one of the best pull casks outside of England. That's very, very traditional, and just delicious. Yeah.
Yeah, we were in London last fall, and I'm sorry, but I don't mean to disparage, but like we were really disappointed in a lot of the cask beers that we found there. They're just, the resurgence of brewing and craft brewing in North America has resulted in a large body of people here who brew, who are passionate. And who work very, very hard to make great beer. And unfortunately, a lot of UK is still in decline, although the craft sector is rebounding. They're just behind us. And really, the Pacific Northwest is the epicenter of craft brewing internationally. So many people look to the Pacific Northwest.
Really? So it's not just like North America; it's like all over. They look to here.
Absolutely.
Pacific Northwest is where it began. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And with Nitro, you guys have Nitro beers?
We're
Not
not
currently.
serving one at the moment,
Yeah, not
but we do.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I had one up at I think White Sales up in Nanaimo.
Mhm.
They had, I forget what the name of it. It's red something, and you can only get it there. This was before COVID, but it was you can only get it there. They didn't sell it in the stores or whatever. And it was so smooth.
Yeah.
It was a whole different experience.
And that's kind of goes back to what you're saying of the what's a common misconception in
Yeah.
beer. It's like having a head on a beer is a very good thing to have on there. Like, don't be scared to pour yourself a solid head. And that's with the Nitro, just making.
Is there an optimal level for the size of the head?
It depends on the beer again,
Yeah.
but
So we say 2 fingers to
Yeah.
the top of the glass.
Okay.
yeah, and that's you want that on there, and not trying to patronize on anything, but that head is keeping your carbonation in. It's shooting aromas into your nose as you're bringing it up to your nose. It's very important. And going back to our brewers, yet again, going back to that mash, another thing, we do steps to envisioning and so that does exactly what we want it to do. So heads are very important. Head of head is very important on beer. It's number one. And like Nitro being that one where it's such small bubbles gives it that incredibly smooth, creamy texture because they're not just exploding right away.
And what about temperature? Are all beers best served at a certain temperature, or does it vary between beers, or how does that work?
Between beers.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
I mean, again, it's a function of what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
When beer is very, very cold, it is able to hold a lot more CO2 in suspension. So carbonated beers want to be colder. And as you back off the carbonation and allow the beers to be served at a bit warmer temperature, you're going to get much more of the flavors in the body of the beer come through, the flavors of the malt or the flavors of the adjuncts. So if we were to take this framboise and chill it down ice cold, you'd lose most of the flavors and it would seem flat.
hence like one to be.
I really like this stuff, by the way.
That's
excellent.
ridiculously good.
It's
isn't it?
delicious.
It reminds me of like kombucha.
Oh yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Because I drink a lot of kombucha, and
Yeah, I
this
can
is
see that.
this is incredible. This is maybe my favorite beer I've ever had.
Oh, awesome! Thank you. Cheers. I'd make Leva very happy.
Stick around.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh shoot! I lost my train of thought on that one.
Flattering makes
as
them
they
go
say,
sideways.
and to be unnamed, incredibly large brewery that prides himself on like showing them the Blue Mountains and how cold their beer is. It's so you don't taste it, and that's the whole point. The colder the beer is, freezing your taste buds as it's going down. So you're not tasting there, where a lot of craft beers, especially stouts and stuff, we want to serve a little bit warmer. So you're getting those almost like a red wine type effect where you're getting all those flavors and showing those different complex notes.
And there's also time and place.
Oh, absolutely.
So as we, head into winter, it's nice to be able to drink your beer out of a goblet, get your hand underneath it, warm it up, get those flavors to come off, and appreciate it in the same way that one would swirl a glass of red wine. And it goes through a lot of the same kinds of processes. Conversely, as you head into spring and summer, and you are looking for a thirst quencher, you maybe don't want those big, heavy flavors. You want something that's cold, carbonated,
crispy
beers that you can pound, what we call crushable, because you pound it and crush the can afterwards.
Last year, I went to a dinner at Lowbrunner Farm, and you guys made a blueberry apricot sour, which was a one-off. Like, this is the only one that was produced, and that's
I made a cask for Andrew on that one. Yes, I remember.
That's right.
That. Yeah.
So I did get to try that.
I this is going again, apologizing to Andrew on that one, because that thing made quite the mess when he first tapped into it.
I wish I had a video of that. I don't think there's video of it. I think there might be a photo.
I think there's a photo floating around of it, but
So yeah, I was there for that.
I did a tart ale and then just loaded it with blueberries and
just blew it everywhere.
Yeah, it was delicious apparently, but it
was delicious.
Smurfed everybody.
I did the same thing at the Victoria Conference Center with a cask of stout once, and managed to get it onto the wall of the upper floor by the mezzanine.
Before this most recent paint job at Spinnakers, I had a few what I call signatures on the ceiling from casks being tapped and hitting the roof and shooting up.
Leave some remnants.
Yeah.
How often do you guys do sort of that one-off event, or like just a flavor for one thing and that's it? Is that very often?
It depends on the event. Obviously, a lot less events this year going on. But especially with casks and stuff, that we would do quite a bit of different things. And I get a lot of room to play, which was quite fun. So we get to do small one-off batches, one-off barrels, one-off casks.
And so do people just approach you like, hey, we got an event? Would you guys be able to do something for this thing?
Yeah, we do usually, yeah. And Andrew's a good friend of mine, so it was really fun to be able to be part of that too on that side too.
Yeah, like what was the inspiration for that flavor? How did that come about?
Blueberry season. I just made this really nice tart mosaic ale, and I had a beautiful bunch of fresh blueberries that I had just blended down, and just thought that was a perfect match. Just seemed right.
Yeah, it was fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
And how many different flavors of beer has Spinnakers done over the years? Do you know?
It's yeah.
I know, so you said like 7,000 something hundred.
7,600, 18 brews. Our brewers doing 19 tonight, but I couldn't even imagine. Can't even think. I've been there 6 years and I've pulled out a whole bunch, but like I said,
it would be in the 200-300 range.
Yeah.
Oh,
easy,
wow,
for sure.
Easy. Yeah.
And how many at a time? So you said there's space to have 9 going at the place right now?
Fermenting, but we usually have.
Well, we have 20 taps on each floor.
Yeah.
On the main towers. And then on the lower floor, in addition to the 20, we've got, another 6? And on the upper floor, another 9 or 10.
Oh, wow.
We mix. My deal is I want to see us always have the ability to have a flight, which is 4 beers in our case, of classics. So that's kind of the old school stuff. I want to have a flight of essentially hoppy stuff, like IPAs and things like that. I want to see a flight of seasonals. I want to see a flight of barrels and sours. And I want to see a flight of ciders. And again, it comes back to when you walk into a bar and there's all of these choices. How do you decide? Well, let's start to narrow your focus a little bit. So do you like classic stuff? Do you like hoppy stuff? Do you want to try some seasonal inspirations? Do you want to try some sours? Do you want to try some ciders? Take your pick. And then we'll get you into 4 in each of those kinds of categories. And ultimately, you can find the beer that you actually want to sit down and drink.
And so at some places, you mentioned for you guys, it's 4 for a flight.
Yeah.
Do other places do different amounts?
Some do 5.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. I've only seen 4. So
depending on the board, whatever board they've made. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But I think 4.
So we do kind of 4 5-ounce pours, which is the equivalent of a pint.
And that can get away with. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You actually just gave me a flashback to Japan where Anton, the guy that I was with, my buddy, he got a flight of sake, but I think there was 20 little things of 20 different sakes at this one place. And like,
it's not a flight, that's a nosedive.
It was a lot.
When I went to school in Kyoto, one of the profs that I had was, let's be honest, he was an alcoholic. And we used to have some of our sessions in a little sake brewery bar. And this was a bar that seated 7 people, so we all got to get in there at once. And it was winter. I went to Kyoto directly from Hawaii, and I did not have enough clothes. I did not anticipate cold.
What time of year was this?
This was January, February, March.
Oh no!
Being warm in Japan is often a state of mind, and so we would huddle at the sake bar, which had, but there would be about 5 or 7 ounce pours, and the meniscus of the sake in the glass absolutely stood up proud over the top of the glass. So there was no way that you're going to lift this to your mouth. So the only way to get into it was to wrap your hands around the glass and lower your face down and start sucking it. And this is one of the most enlightening experiences for me, in just a whole different way of approaching what we do. And so this is before we did the pub, when I was going to school. And it was complete pushback on industrialized. It was really cool. It was fun to see. And the characters that support these joints are always amusing.
And actually mentioning sake again, you did remind me that a lot of people, that's one thing where people say, oh, I don't like sake. It's amazing. That seems to be like universal. Like the majority of people, when I ask them here, they all say they don't like it. And now that I've got to experience some really interesting stuff, I'm like, well, no, I think if you had that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's different stuff. There's like the non-pasteurized sake and stuff you can get over there.
Oh, I love that milky one.
That's radically different.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful.
So yeah, I was going to ask about aged beer. That was one thing coming into this I was going to ask about. And here we are sitting in this room where you have stuff that ages for different periods of time. What's like the longest aged beer that you guys have done or are doing, would you say?
Like the Frambois here is about 18 months usually on, like as a guideline for us. I think there's as you can see, there's about 180 more in here.
I kind of think, and it's kind of like 18, 24 months.
It's kind of 24
like
months
an optimum.
And
after that, depending upon yeast strains and so forth, you tend to get some yeast autolysis where the yeast starts to break down after a while.
Oh, really?
So unlike, say, aging red wines where they are racked off, and there's like absolutely no yeast in there. These are more perhaps comparable to method champenois, where again they go through processes to turn the bottles, and they'll pop the cork and they'll pull the product off, and so it's that yeast autolysis is what you're trying to get rid of. So there's kind of two enemies. There's oxidation and yeast autolysis, and over time they'll both try and come back and get you. So the bottle fermentation ideally eats up all the oxygen, so that's not going to be a problem. But unless we were to untap these and decant them, and then try to go for a longer period of time, I think that's kind of a limit. There's also
So do you just have to
within this that kind of time frame, there's still a freshness that's there, and over a longer period of time, that freshness is going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got some beers that came from Thomas Hardy that are, like kind of 20, 30 years old, and I'm just not drunk enough to drink them anymore. Seriously, why drink bad beer when there's so much good beer to be had?
Yeah.
And Thomas Hardy's were always talked about as these things that you could age out for long periods of time. I just don't think they get any better.
And so each beer, though, is different, the amount of time that you'd want to be aging it for.
Oh, for sure. Depends. Yeah. It depends on the alcohol level, the hoppiness and so forth, all these things that are built into it, and what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's a big
and
one.
Some beers, it really just like a Hefeweizen or something like that. You want all that yeast in suspension, and it's going to settle out in a month. So you want to drink it in 2 weeks.
A good example is we have a couple. There's one on at the pub right now. Our 7,000th brew, blah blah blah, was done as a wild ferment. We just brewed the beer, put it in barrels, and left it in our barrel room to see where it would go. And after about a year and a half of just kind of playing, and Leva always coming in and tasting, and we're going through, we found like this beer is just ready. It's just whatever this one single barrel is absolutely beautiful and bright and fresh and amazing. And then so that kind of plays into it too, where you're just like, no, this is the one right now. We should be drinking this. People should be drinking this. Let's get it going.
And so knowing that something is ready, is that subjective? Like you're basically getting what you're looking for and you're like, it's there now.
Yeah. This room is her playground. And when she says this beer's ready to go, it's like,
yep,
it's ready to go.
Time to go.
Put it, let's get it going.
Yeah.
And looking at craft breweries over the years, how have they changed?
Enormously.
Yeah.
There are, some have enormously, and then there are more coming in that are starting where other ones launched from and have gone off on tangents from. So an initial big change is on the equipment side. And so the equipment today is just so superior to what it was 35 years ago. A lot of people who have worked in our brewery have created all these lists of how we need to get rid of all this broken down old equipment and buy like a keen new brewery. And I've always pushed back on it. I think that you're talking about a bunch of stainless stuff. You're talking about some technology. And I think that in terms of the brewing process, the mechanics, there's other stuff that's much more push button and so forth, but it's just not as hands on the material. You're not picking the stuff up. You're not appreciating as much like the exact grind that you've got on the barley. You're not appreciating as much the resins and the aromas that you're getting out of the whole leaf hops, because you're ripping open bags that are foil bags that are nitro sealed, and you're just like pouring them down the chute. And so a lot of craft breweries are taking industrial technology and scaling it down to their scale. There's also the need for breweries to keep up with production. And so we're bringing things like centrifuges into the equation to take what comes out of the process and just spin it and get all the particles out so you can package it tomorrow instead of letting it run through a normal aging process. And so I think what really is important is that there are people playing at both ends of the spectrum and everywhere in between, and that we as consumers have the opportunity to go around and try all this stuff. So one of the great things that's going on now is that there is a much greater public awareness of craft beer. Government appreciates the benefits of craft beer in terms of the employment that's created in terms of the investment that's created and how it's good for the economy. And so you end up with entities today like Destination BC who are supporting something like the BC Ale Trail and are contributing hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to take craft beer to market and create itineraries and ways for people to tour the province and cool things to go and see while you're going from beer stop to beer stop to beer stop and trying out what all of these interesting, crazy characters choose to bring to market for us. And that's, I think, where the real fun is being able to go to the source, see how they do it, taste how they do it, check out the neighborhood, and enjoy some more of our province during these COVID times.
It's amazing what you can find in certain places too.
Yeah.
Because we found a German brewery in Japan. I forget what city it was, if it was. It was, I think it was by Mount Fuji. But there's a guy there, a German guy, making German beer. And like, I mean, Anton was in love with it. He wanted
the dream, man.
I think he would have loved to have just stayed there for like 2 days straight and talk to that guy. But yeah, it's amazing to see. You just get like someone who's doing their thing. And it might not like necessarily be what you'd expect from that place, but then it has an influence from where it's being done.
Absolutely.
And when you are, or I imagine when, like, let's say you did replace all the machinery, got new stuff, the beer would lose some character, would it not?
Yeah, I think so.
It'd be different.
Like,
Yeah, it would be different.
The beer we make at Spinnakers is very handcrafted. Like they're on what goes in lines, and I like to say a shitty carpenter blames his tools. You know what I mean? And like, there's nothing we can't do with this older system. That's something. It's just a different technique, maybe just not the same application as these new systems would do.
So is this a case of where, like, if you got the new system, it might save time, but you'd be losing out on what makes it unique and what makes it like Spinnakers?
Yeah, I would save time because we would have a larger system,
Yeah.
so we would employ less people and
Larger batches at once. Yeah.
It'd be very different.
It takes the same amount of time to make 1 liter of beer as it takes 20,000. So you can kind of see where that goes. But like I said, this is our very
different.
handcrafted brews where I think there's not a lot of breweries. We use a whole leaf hops, which is not very common anymore, but I think has its large advantages to it. And
so what does that mean?
Most of the hops that you receive now are like pelletized. They basically look like rabbit food. But we use a whole leaf, very traditional old way of.
So
which is a lot more work. It's harder to do. The hops deteriorate substantially over time. And so the same hop put into a beer 6 months later is going to be a fraction of the aromats, the bittering units, the flavor compounds as it was when it was fresh.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to make the same thing throughout the year, you have to adjust the recipes. So in a more industrial process where it's all vac pack pelletized, you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff. It doesn't matter. So you're not as dialed into the flavors that you're creating as time goes on.
So another level of complexity is added.
It's
but
more
I guess,
work.
but at that point too, does that allow you then to be able to have another tool you can use to make it taste different?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
You can amp it up.
Like, are there reasons why you would use maybe some that have been aged a little bit and not use them when they're super, super fresh? Or do you always want to use it when it's fresh?
Most sour beers like having aged hops in them.
Okay.
Ones that you're going to, because you're going to be losing. The big part of the hops is that like those aromatics and the bitterness, but that degrades over time. So if you have a beer that, like, you wouldn't want this framboise very bitter. It wouldn't match at all. So we use but aged hops that have lost that kind of potency, but still have a very nice kind of different flavor to them. So yeah, there is both on the game. Like hazy IPAs, that's all about the freshest you can get, the freshest hop and put in and drinking right away. Where some of these sour barrel sours take time, and I want that little more funkiness to it of a aged hop.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And Spinnakers does so much stuff that I'm wondering if I could mention some of the things that they do. And Paul, if you'd sort of speak on the different aspects. So like the vinegar. How did the vinegar become to be?
I was getting beat up at home for not taking the empties back. And we have a stone house in Oak Bay, and we have this little cellar in the basement where you get to put the empties, and they were out of sight, out of mind, until the word came that I needed to get rid of them. And so as I was bending down to pick up these stacks of bombers, I got this waft of vinegar came off of them. And as always, curiosity got the better of me. And so I went diving into the box to try to find out where this vinegar smell was coming from. And it was essentially half a bottle of Hefeweizen that somebody sometime didn't drink, which naturally turned to vinegar with the aid of the fruit flies in my basement. And so I tasted it, and I thought it was absolutely delicious. And I set about trying to figure out how to make this stuff. And I came in conversation with a guy named Jim Pryor. Jim is a guy who lives in Victoria. His wife, Hillary, is a renowned filmmaker. And Jim worked for Bass in UK. He was a brewer for Bass. And I think he and a couple of his buddies bought up Ruddles County and brought it back to life and sold it off and made enough money for Jim to retire on. So Jim used to come in and hang out in our brewery all the time. And he was particularly helpful in coaching Lon Liddell, who was one of our brewers who now brews at a brew pub and a brewery in Ottawa. And Jim was having the same problem at home as I was, that he was making vinegar from beer in his basement, and his wife was equally unhappy with the volume of fruit flies in the house. And so Jim had the technology, and we were waiting to build what became the new front entrance, the provisions retail area for check-in, check-out for guest houses and stuff. And I was waiting on a permit because the design panel in Victoria rejected my drawings because they felt the building was unbalanced, and the contractor was complaining because he wanted to work and he'd saved the time. And I said, well, hey, come here with me. I had done up this drawing for a little vinegar brewery, and I was going to put it in the back corner of the parking lot, but the city told me that having a vinegar brewery in a essentially restaurant was not considered an allowable use, and therefore we weren't allowed to do this. So we went up the street behind one of our guest houses, and they banged it in the backyard of there for me. And so then we set up what Anita Stewart, who's the queen of Canadian cuisine, and she's food laureate at Guelph University, she calls it my contraption. And so it's a series of Grundy tanks that we pulled out of the basement that we fitted with a couple of kegs on top of that, and then put a couple of condensing units on top of that, little Perlot glycol system in there. And so we're able to chill the condensers, and we put beer into the Grundy tank, and we recirculate it and drop it in at the top of the keg where it falls through this medium of bacteria, the bacteria that's used for making vinegars, Acetobacter bacteria. So the bacteria eats the alcohol and gives off acetic acid, which is what vinegar is as a byproduct. So what we've done is we've created a process that's very parallel to what happens in the brewery, where we take grain and we mash it and we create sweet wort, which is full of sugar, and we feed it to a bunch of yeast. The yeast consumes the sugar and gives off alcohol. Well, in this other process, we're doing exactly the same thing, feeding alcohol to Acetobacter bacteria. In both cases, we're trying to manage healthy, happy colonies of yeast and bacteria that if we make them happy and feed them good stuff, they create cool stuff for us. And that's how we make vinegar. So as opposed to Heinz or Grantham's or whoever who will use white grain distilled alcohol, we are actually using beer with flavor. So the big guys are going to take their white vinegar and then they're going to color and flavor it with caramelized sugars and stuff to make malt vinegar. That is like what we do from scratch.
And do you guys ever do a vinegar based on one of the beers?
Absolutely.
Oh yeah.
So it's like this is this, but it's vinegar.
The stout vinegar, the IPA, the Hep. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. So how many different vinegars are there?
Right now we're sort of focusing on 3. We're doing an IPA. We're doing like a black malt, which is kind of like a stout or a black lager, and we do the classic, which is our house, which is essentially Scottish ale.
And is there one that works better as a base for vinegar, or can you do it with anything?
Well, it depends what the vinegar is being used as a base for. So if the vinegar is being used as a base for making soups and sauces and stuff like that, Scottish ale. If you're looking for something to splash on spring greens, IPA. If you want to splash something on ice cream, stout.
I feel like vinegar could be another thing that people are like, yeah, I don't like that.
Drinking vinegars.
Oh, that's a big.
So the drinking vinegar thing, I've actually tried some of that, and it's amazing.
It's lovely. Yeah, absolutely.
Like just put a little
cider vinegar. Absolutely.
Yeah, we make cider vinegars as well. Pear cider and apple cider vinegar.
What don't you guys do? Because I mean, you got the mineral water.
Yeah.
So how did the mineral water come to be?
We don't make gasoline yet.
Yeah.
How did the mineral water come to be?
We kept having these fundraisers out at Souk. We have a property on Souk River, just below the potholes. And there was a campaign going on to save the Souk potholes. We had heard so this unfortunate guy, Albert Ewan, developed the area upriver from us, and he had these magnificent dreams, which I, having spent some time in Japan, understood what he was trying to accomplish. But he ultimately ran out of money. And we had heard that there was a gravel extractor that was looking to buy the property. And we were able to bring the Land Conservancy in on it. And we held a couple of fundraisers at our place to help them create awareness. And ultimately, on one of them, a check arrived that enabled the purchase, which was pretty cool. But we were drawing our water out of the river. And when you have 200 people show up for barbecue and you're pulling your water out of the river, I went, we have a problem. We should not be doing this. So I phoned up these guys in Gled Lake who were well drillers, and I said, I have this property on Souk River Road that I'm hoping you might go out and have a look at, and let me know what I need to do. I think we need to put in a well, and I have no idea where it came from, but I said at the same time, and I'm wondering if maybe we could put one in town too. And the guy jumped all over it. He said, yeah, there's lots of water in town. I'll tell you what, I'll check out your place at Souk, and I'll come and see you tomorrow. So he arrived the next morning, and he said, yeah, Souk's no problem. Where do you want the hole here? And I said, well, don't you have to do this witching thing? You have to have this fork and you walk around. And he said, yeah, you could throw money over your shoulder, or we could just drill a hole. What do you want? We know there's water down there. So I said, so this is going to make a mess. And he went, yep. And so I said, so maybe if you put it over here, you get your truck in the corner and it wouldn't be so disruptive. So he came back, and I thought they were going to come back the next day or a couple of weeks later. He came back about an hour and a half later and said, we're ready to go. We need your okay. And I walked out and I looked around and I went, whoa. Any chance you could move it about 2 feet closer to the fence? And this long faces, jaw drops. And I looked around and I realized that they had their whole truck up on blocks in order to make the drill vertical. And I just looked around and went, go ahead. And so they fired this thing up, and it sounded like chitty, chitty, bang, bang. And this thing was actually kind of on the shocks, on the blocks, jumping up and down. And the drill was going around, and they're throwing water at the hole, and it was just making a mess. And the neighbors all started to show up. And so one of the guys that came over was from across the fence, the electrical contractor who was in today. And he says, like, what are you doing now? So I told him the story, and he said, well, my staff are all going crazy. They want to go home. And I said, oh, why don't you just send them over? We'll buy them meals, and they can drink beer all afternoon, and we'll maybe try and see how quickly we can finish this thing up. So they all booked off for the day and came upstairs, and we're happy campers. And I took off. And I went out to Souk, and he phoned me about 10:30 the next morning. He said, you're going to love us. We're down 225 feet. We hit an aquifer, and you got some sweet water coming up. And so we went 225 feet down through granite, like we're right on the seashore. And we broke into an aquifer that probably comes from across the Strait of Juan de Fuca out of the Olympic Peninsula. The water profile is different than the wells out on the peninsula. And actually the area around Vic High was called Brewer's Hill. And it was known for having lots of wells. So these guys, like, well, they're old school, they're old family. And so they absolutely knew what they were doing. And so, yeah, we just, like, shit house luck. We hit mineral water.
Victoria Tea, you know.
So if you're trying to do a well, do you basically just drill until you hit something?
Yeah.
You just keep going?
Yeah, the hydrologists would know where to go.
Yeah.
And what to do. And, like, for example, our well in Souk, we're just 85 feet, and they hit rock. So we're 85 feet through sand and gravel, which is a nice filtration mechanism below the river. And the water there constantly throws minerals, rust. It needs to get filtered. Water in town doesn't need to get filtered. We do it because federal standards say that you must do this, you must do that. And we run it through UV to sterilize the bacteria that are not in there. But other than that, it's just like straight up, it's delicious. It's the only locally produced mineral water.
And what about the chocolates?
Chocolates. I was at a brewers conference in Chicago, and I ran into these guys from Cho in San Francisco. Cho is put together by the people that put together Wired magazine. And they had this really cool ethical story about their chocolate. And beyond the fact that their chocolate is ridiculously delicious, they had a really good backstory. So they were taking production back into the areas where the cacao was being grown. So chocolate is a really dirty subject. And there's a lot of severely impoverished people who grow cacao for nothing.
And who never actually get to try chocolate,
they never
right?
get to eat chocolate. They don't know what chocolate is. They've never had chocolate.
I've heard little bits about this, and it's horrific.
Yeah.
Horrific.
So Mary and I went down to San Francisco, and we went down to the pier, and we checked this out. And these guys, they went into East Germany and bought a chocolate plant that was like from about the time of the Industrial Revolution. And they sandblasted it all, took it apart and cleaned it up and put it back together. And it's just a really, really nice story all around. And so we were the first people to bring Cho chocolates into Canada. I'm kind of iffy right now on Cho. They got bought out by a Japanese company. The chocolate,
Big chocolate,
changed slightly in terms of how they present it. The flavor compounds are still good. They're still there. We'll see what happens. There's a guy in Victoria, Taylor Kennedy, Serene Chocolate. I would love to use his stuff. It's going to cost about 3 times as much. And I'm just not sure where the threshold is at the moment. But we're all working with Taylor. He's providing us some husks and stuff that are going into our Chocoholic, which is one of our spirits. And it's ridiculously delicious.
Yeah. So what's that one? What's the Chocoholic?
So we do a Chocoholic liqueur and a Chocoholic stout too, which is fun. But we use the cocoa husks. So it's the husk of the bean, which doesn't have any of the sugars. It's just this really rich, dry dark chocolate flavor just from the oils on the husk. So on the brewing side, I use them in the kettle, and we add them to like a nice chocolate beer without adding any fake chocolate or actually any chocolate in it. It's just this essence. Where Cal on the distillery side is steeping her vodka or base spirit when she feels like in these and just pulling those rich, dry flavors out. It's luscious as a liqueur.
Yeah. I on a trip to Peru, we were in Otalitambu waiting for the train to go down to Machu Picchu. And there was a chocolate shop just down the street from the train station. And as a welcome gesture, they handed me a cup of chocolate tea when I walked in. And it was steeped husks. And I just went, bingo. We're making chocolate beer. We should be using these to make the brewing water taste like chocolate before we even start these things. And so it's just kind of like one thing led to another.
And you guys also have an on-site bakery.
Yeah.
So is that all the bread is being made in-house and everything in the restaurant? Is that right?
Yeah.
Because that one important thing, like I had the chicken burger today, which was phenomenal. And it's really important, like the bun. The bun, when you have a burger or sandwich or whatever, the bread or the bun is like, it's so fundamentally important.
It's the vessel, right? It's the most
100%.
It's getting it to your mouth.
Yeah, that is so important.
Yeah, so bread making and beer making are the same, aren't they? Like it's a fermentation project, and so is chocolate. So the opportunity to have this major garbage pail vessel full of sourdough starter. It's just like, it's life, it's living, it's like all the other stuff that we're doing.
And like you said, it makes all the difference in the flavor right there if you're doing it.
And the texture.
Yeah. In-house.
Especially if you have like an heirloom starter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which I assume it's probably, how old is the starter?
30 years old, I think.
No, it's only about 5 years old, 5 or 6 years old at this point.
Okay.
They saved it from the fire at least the first one. That was, it's been.
Well, on our last fire, when we were closed, also at the beginning of the pandemic thing, Chef took the sourdough starter home. It lived in her house, and she fed it every day.
Hey, you gotta
and that's just what you have to do with real food. And the opportunity to have real food is something that we cherish. It's part of the fabric of who we are. It's part of where we live, that we are afforded the opportunities to do this, to be like this, to enjoy this.
When you were first going like farm to table, what did the landscape look like in Victoria and like the West Coast for cuisine and restaurants?
We had a guy, David Craven, who lived up island, and he would come in once or twice a week. And it took me a while to figure out that he actually lived up island, but he would come to town once a week to get provisions, and he would always stop in for lunch and have a beer. And when I asked him what he did, he told me he was a hog producer. And I just like, why would you produce hogs? And he struggled, and ultimately he went out of business. And that's old school agriculture. And so what I have been so privileged to watch over the last 35 years is this transition between old style, small scale industrial agriculture to where we are today, where we have this multitude of young people who are growing things with passion. And being here on the West Coast, and me having spent so much time in Vancouver and understanding the multi-ethnicity of the opportunities that we have on the West Coast, we can grow anything from anywhere. And so our tables are very rich, and I would say uniquely so. And it's like we were talking earlier about old world, new world. We have this opportunity to scour Europe, South America, Asia, and bring all of these things to our table. And they become the cuisine that is Southern Vancouver Island, which differentiates us from the prairies, Ontario, East Coast. And we're developing, in the face of globalization, this regionality. And that gives people reason to travel. Mm-hmm. And so when we travel, we absolutely appreciate the bounty of whatever country it is, whatever part of the world it is. And I think uniquely here, we are lacking tradition and open again to experimentation. And so what better place to be? We're so lucky.
So is it creating tradition now with what's going on for this area?
Yeah.
We're in the midst of creating that.
I think so.
And we just eat so much better than most people do.
And I really think
and we just have access to all of this stuff for like 9 months a year. And it's like, okay, we're starting to get towards squash season. And we're going to eat winter veg for 4 months. And then we're going to celebrate when asparagus starts coming up. And we go through this whole orchestrated thing that's a function of our climate.
And then you get spot prawns for a couple of weeks.
Oh,
yeah.
That's the best. And I think,
how special is this?
And I think especially after this whole pandemic thing, and not after, but really regionalizing us and really focusing back in on Victoria and this area. It's like we just can't run to Vancouver. We can't go anywhere. So it's starting to build a culture within ourselves. That we had a bit of a culture, but it was mostly for tourists. But now we're creating something as a city and as a island of our own. I really think.
I think people are getting more interested in supporting local, like farms and really getting local produce since COVID's hit. I think there's been a lot more interest in it. And how many different partnerships do you guys have with like farms and different local producers?
In the neighborhood of 35-ish or so.
Yeah.
And that it's a lot more work to do what we do. It would be so much easier to just send your order into Cisco and sit back and wait and take it out of the box and throw it on the grill.
100%.
It's just so much more work, but it's so much more rewarding. And when we started doing this, there was Sinclair and Frederic out at Sioux Harbor House. And there was some stuff going on in California. The farm to table really did not particularly exist back then. And so for me, the opportunity to have watched this come about has been particularly cool. I remember an episode when I was a really little kid. I think I was probably 5. And there were some friends of my parents who had had enough of city life, like city life in Victoria in the mid-50s, huh? And they were selling off their possessions and they were moving up island to a farm. And all their friends were horrified. It was like, what's wrong with these people? Who are they? What are they doing? And I remember being at a yard sale where they were getting rid of their stuff. And I kind of forgot about it. It was just like an episode from childhood that was not a big deal. And then there was a Feast of Fields, probably 10 years ago.
I still have to go to that event.
That was great.
And
Great event.
this one was at Fairburn Farm. And these are the people that did the water buffalo. And we arrived there for setup. And I just got this like really eerie feeling. And I went for a walk and I realized I'd been there that long ago. Like when I was a kid, I was on that farm. And these guys were outliers. And now these guys are the center attraction. And they began IOPA, the Island Organic Producers Association. They were the seeds of what's going on today.
It's so important to have those people that just they believe in something, and they do it. Doesn't matter if nobody else is doing it. Doesn't matter.
Yep.
They believe in it so strongly they just have to. Even if some people might be like, "Why are you doing that?
Yeah,
why are you doing that?" You follow that passion, and I really respect people that stick with their guns and do it because they love it.
And the horrendous process they were put through by the Federal Department of Agriculture, fundamentally just killed off their herd and allowed them to keep the second generation that were born here because they would be disease free. It's like, wow. Brutal. What we do to people.
And they stuck with it and kept going.
It's getting better. Times are changing.
Yeah.
We're becoming more receptive. But yeah, they stuck to it. They kept going.
Good for them.
Yeah.
That's really important that people are willing to do that.
Yeah. And if you go down to Prima Stata on Cook Street, you can see the photograph on the wall of Daryl, who's the son, and one of the herd. It's a great photograph.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, when I'm in there next, I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, go check it out.
How has
great pizza too?
Absolutely. I want to try the pizza at Spinnakers. I never have. Actually, one item that I have had that I loved was the pulled pork nachos.
Oh yeah, I think some of the best nachos, probably the best nachos in town.
Those ones stand out for me.
Yeah.
But early in the year, we did have COVID hit, and we're in the middle of the pandemic. And how have things changed for Spinnakers since that's happened? What's it look like for you guys?
Well, we kind of laughed and said we're going back to 1984. We're very fortunate to have a building that's large enough that we are through the process of maintaining social distancing, able to have about the same number of people spread over 2 floors as we had back in 1984. And we basically just re-engineered how we do what we do in order to make it work.
And that's every restaurant now, and every business is just trying to revamp a new system, and it's been stumbles along the way for everybody, I'm sure, but everybody's learning.
Of course,
it's a very different world, but yeah, I think the big one for us too is the just not as many people coming in and having beers. It's like it's lacking that one, so we become more of a production brewery and kind of gearing our things towards more packaged product than we normally would have. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's
one of the big changes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Our big adjustments.
We're down to about summertime was our historically busy time, and so with the loss of capacity, and able to make up some of the interior capacity by adding some seats out in the parking lot, we were down about 40%. As we get into fall winter season, we're down about 15% now. And
versus last year.
Yeah. And we're going to do fine.
I'm really happy to hear that.
We're fortunate enough to have a large enough property to be diverse enough that we'll be fine. We'll survive.
I'm very happy to hear
and
that.
I feel very sad for so many people, young and old, who just don't find themselves in a set of circumstances that enables them to be successful.
It's devastating that people, unfortunately, are going to lose what they've created, and at no fault of their own.
Yep.
They did nothing wrong.
It's just a changed reality. And so we all have to figure out how we adapt to that changed reality and find our ways to make it work. And very much it's a function of individual properties and individuals' ability to create opportunity out of what they see lying around them. But yeah, absolutely, it could be devastating.
Yeah,
there's a lot of dishes I won't be able to eat again for ever, and because of this. These beautiful restaurants shutting down, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah. So like, although a place did shut down, I don't think it was COVID related, but Northern Quarter, I loved their brunch so much, and I didn't get to go because I didn't realize they were closing down. And then I saw after it had stopped, and I was very sad.
That was the best charcuterie bar in town, bar none. Absolutely at Northern Quarter.
I do know that Torn now is at Foo, so Torn is there. But yeah, I do miss the brunch there quite a bit.
Yeah.
So when we look at the food in the restaurant, what is the inspiration for it? I would guess it's probably being the Pacific Northwest, but what is the inspiration for the food?
Hunger pangs. It was. It goes back to the early days when it was important to have copious quantities of food on the plate. We had no advertising budget when we opened. We put all that money that we might have spent through whatever form of media marketing or whatever into kitchen cost of sales. And we ran a ridiculously high cost of sales for about 5 or 6 years as an inducement, as a brewery pub to break into what was traditionally a restaurant marketplace. And we had a lot of upset restaurateurs in town at what we were doing, and that we were essentially subsidizing the kitchen and food cost of sales by selling lots of beer. We gave birth through that process to what became known as the pub style restaurant, where restaurants wanted to behave like pubs under different licenses. And that whole genre was after we opened and people started to emulate what we were doing. And then when we came back from Seattle, where we opened a couple of brew pubs in the late 80s, it was necessary to solve this cost of sales problem, which had become a big problem because food was consistently at least 50% of what we sold. And so if you're doing half of what you sold at a cost of sales of 50, 60%, it's difficult to pay labor and pay the other expenses that go along with the place. And so we need to whittle that down to a reasonable number. And so one of the things that I came up with for doing that was to use local food, because competition could not use local food because nobody was doing local food, because local food didn't particularly exist in our neighborhood at that time, except for at Sioux Harbor House, which was very, very high end. So my line of thinking, my rationale was if we could do local food, we could charge more for what we were selling. And we got pushback on it. And what we did was we steered away from traditional items, except for those things that we absolutely could not get rid of that we still sell today, like halibut and chips. And we went searching for people to grow this stuff for us. And what we learned in the process of doing that was that farmers were poor. And when we put the fact that farmers drove beat up old trucks together with the fact that people didn't want to pay more for their food, it was pretty easy to explain to them that, you know what? We know the guy that grows this for us. And If he doesn't get a better truck, he's not going to make it here someday. And he has just as much right to a living as the rest of us do. And so we need to be respectful and pay him more. And if you want cheap food, maybe you'd be happier going down the street. And so once we're able to work that kind of language into people, then we were able to get away from this ridiculously high food cost, which was even then based on pretty much everything coming out of Mexico and California through multinational suppliers. So branching off into locally grown food and supporting local people was a breakthrough moment for us, and enabled us to move what we did away from what the rest of the marketplace was doing. And so we lost a few consumers who weren't prepared to follow us down that road. But in the last, 5-7 years, everybody wants to be local now. So what we do is we're well positioned for that at this point.
And again, that's sticking with your guns, having a belief and just doing it when other people are questioning why are you doing this?
Yeah, and so to the inspiration, it's local seasonal. Like what's available now. You mentioned spot prawns. That's a short season. And so many of these food items have very short seasons when they are at their best. And I kind of pushed back against eating tomatoes in December, January. I would way rather have a tomato that had been turned into some kind of a powerful tasting relish that I can spread around instead of squishing some ubiquitous red thing out of a bottle.
I've really been thinking about that more and more. Is I shouldn't be eating certain things in certain times of the year. Because the more people I'm talking to, and they're describing how they used to live when they lived elsewhere. That's how people eat.
I'm from Ontario originally, and you'd be under 3 feet, 4 feet of snow, and I'm like, of course you're not going to grow anything, but still, it just kind of had that same that negative feeling. And moving here and having to explore this, why wouldn't you eat what is being able to be grown a week ago? 10 feet down the road or whatnot, and it just seems makes more sense. Stuff
tastes so much better, and it lasts.
It's healthier,
so much longer.
Absolutely,
there's more nutrients in it.
100%.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's don't eat junk. Eat good food.
I'm going back to the lettuce I got from the farmer guys, the agriculture guys. And I got this lettuce that still stands out to me because a month later, it was still as good as the very first day when I got it. Yeah. Legit. It hadn't deteriorated. It seemed like at all. And it was insane. You can't find that in a store.
No, not at all. That's exactly it. It's yet again goes back to where we live. And there's a reason why we live here. Why aren't we celebrating that?
Yeah, I think there is a disconnect too with food costs and what people associate how much something should cost. Because I feel like people think that people's conception of how much it should cost, that their perception is it's way too cheap, or it should be cheaper than it is.
Yeah,
it actually should cost way more than what it does.
It should cost a lot more.
Yeah,
but we grew up in a culture of cheap food. We grew up in a culture of industrialized production of cheap food. And I think the real tragedy is that so many people who are poor people eat such terrible food because that's what they think they can afford to eat. And so there's a lot of people that are not very healthy as a consequence of eating bad food. So again, we're fortunate to be here. Enjoy it, celebrate it.
Like Paul said earlier, I think there's that really big disconnect of if you got to know your local farmer, if you saw this guy's family and he's just trying to make food and put money on his table, would you really be trying to hack him down for another $2 or $1 off or something like that?
Yeah,
there's consequences to these, and we need these people to be doing this. So,
1,000,000%. Yeah. They need to be supported. And then, like I said, I think since COVID, a lot more people are interested in shopping locally and helping those producers.
Rightfully so.
And I think the other thing that it does is it supports a growing cadre of individuals who actually like good food and want to produce good food. And, as the COVID thing carries on, I think in at the same time that it shuts down a bunch of restaurants, I think it opens up opportunities for chefs and cooks who might have worked in those restaurants to find their own way of connecting with consumers and creating their own way of remaining attached to making food and selling food, and just the way in which we do it and the way in which we connect with people who are otherwise stuck at home. It's going to evolve. So I think this winter is going to be really fun to watch and see who rises up doing what in some cool ways. There's a lot of people who are not comfortable going out into restaurants.
I'm one of those, to be honest.
And we, as a community, are going to find ways to connect with those people. And I think it's maybe premature to say what those ways are going to all look like, but it's going to happen for sure, because that's what we as entrepreneurs do. And I say we in the grand scale of things, not us in particular, although we're going to have a stab at it too.
Do you guys do any type of like pairing dinners where you pair?
We used to do lots of pairing dinners.
Yeah.
They are an enormous amount of work. And they're very, very difficult to do in these times. And we don't have the capacity to do them at this time. We don't have,
outside of COVID though, would you like, when COVID's over and we're back to normal, will that be a thing? Do you think?
it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
And it's a lot of work.
I find that half the time is like the work goes into, you're kind of telling people what they're going to taste, and like, you like this, and then they're like, oh, of course I taste that. And we're like, oh, you're kind of losing that kind of fun of like, oh, what is like, why does this pair with it? And like, it's tough. I've never.
Yeah, we haven't done them for really quite a long time now.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I got tired of doing them.
Because there's always a spiel and a speech to go.
But they are an enormous amount of work. And in order to do them, you have to set aside a large area, which means that you're denying access to other people who just might show up. And you kind of look at the balance of it all. It's
40 like 5-ounce tasters. You know, I understand the reasons for it and that, but I personally have never been a huge fan. Like, there's always classic pairings that go with it, but it's very subjective. It's like I said, everybody's palate's different, and you're going to find something that's you find absolutely lovely compared to somebody else's.
Everybody's palate is definitely different. Mine, I always like, my palate's not that great, so I always go back to like,
it's not great. It's your palate.
Well, no, but like, I just mean I can't explain things the way I want to explain them when I'm saying like, oh, this is like this. I go back to very rudimentary, like basic stuff. Like, sometimes I'll say to somebody, and in my head, I'm like, am I insulting them by comparing it to this thing?
No,
but it's like a pizza pop, but like to the nth degree.
Yeah,
like next level, like this kind of thing. That's what goes through my head.
Yeah, just connecting with who you're on the other side. That's, but that's it's just like you could basically like I don't think I have a great palate myself. I can pick up. There's certain things I'm very susceptible to, and some things I just can't. And that's very hard to describe to somebody. Like, explain the color purple to me, or just describe apple. It's very different, and you're going to have very different sensories with that. So who am I to tell you what you're going to like and not like with something else?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah, like it's.
We've had experience with individuals who are ridiculously eloquent in describing what it is that you're about to taste, and I'm not sure that stand-up comedy is not important. Appropriate use for some of their talents.
You might have a hint of flashing red light and horse blanket. It was
funny because when we used to do the TV segments, Joe Perkins, Mike, and I, we would do the segments, and they would always put the camera on me and be like, "Okay, describe what you're having." And I'm like, I don't know how to describe this. And I think Joe eventually got so annoyed with me because that's all I'd say.
Oh, well, that's
And I just didn't know. It was hilarious. I thought it was funny. So sometimes I did it a little bit, maybe just to bug him a little bit. But shout out to Joe. I miss Joe, and I miss those segments.
It's it's really. I find those. It's very subjective. Like you can tell people what they're like. You taste soap here? Oh, yes, I do taste soap now. Like,
yeah.
There's nothing soap in this. What are you talking about? But of course, that's not slandering anybody's palate. Or some people just have an amazing range of being able to pick up certain things.
Of course. Another thing Spinnakers has is accommodations. Has the accommodations always been there, or did that get added in at some point, or how did that go?
People were just passing out the parking lot too often, you know.
Back in the early 90s, I had an opportunity to travel with Buko von Koysik, who is one of the guys who put Okanagan Spring Brewery together. And Buko is German. He and his family were actually in East Germany, and he managed to escape and walk across Europe and ended up in Vernon. And Buko and I went to Heidelberg to investigate malting, and we actually bought a malting plant there and set it up in Armstrong, up just north of Vernon. Became Gambrinus Malting. And we stayed at this at the brewery that had the malting house, and I became aware at that point of this kind of elite group of breweries that also offered accommodation for travelers. And I just thought it was a really cool concept. It was really fun to actually be able to stay at the brewery. And I didn't think anything about it at some point, and I guess it was kind of like 1998. A guy who ran a shop up in the corner of Catherine and Esquimalt called Tools and Space, he approached me one day and said, the elderly lady who's living next door is moving out, and you should buy her house. I went, yeah, why? He said, well, you should do a B&B. And I went, are you kidding me? Like, the house is a wreck. It should be demolished, except that it's on the heritage list. And you got all the tools. So, like, you got a woodwork shop, you do it. And he went, no, you think about this. Go away and think about it. So a couple of days later, curiosity got the better of me, and I'm in the bar. And there's one of our regular patrons who runs a 5-star B&B in James Bay. Is sitting at the bar, quaffing his pint of ESB. And I sat down beside him and said, so, hey, tell me, what's it cost to clean the room when people come and stay with you and stay overnight and then check out? And what's it cost you to feed them? He said, why are you asking me these questions? So I told him about the house up the street, and he said, well, that'll be another pint. And so, long story short, 2 pints later, I had a spreadsheet, and we were about to renovate the kitchen. And so I had the banker in to song and dance my request for funding to redo the kitchen. And he just kind of like, yeah, okay. And I said, what do you mean? He said, we'll give you the money. Yeah, okay. So I took my spreadsheet and I slid it across the table at him and said, so what do you think about this? And he looked at it and he said, so what do you want me to do? I said, I want you to finance it. And he said, how much money are you going to put up? I said, none. I want you to finance it. And he said, okay. So we bought the house. And then I got up there and crawled around and looked and realized that it was built in 1886. It had no foundation. It was sitting on rocks. And it was derelict. So we made application to the city to do an inn. Transient accommodation, went through 11-month process of public hearings and rezoning before getting to the point where we could get a building permit. And by the time we had the building permit issued, I was able to go in for an occupancy permit because we had rebuilt the whole building and had put it on a new foundation and stripped it to the outside skin, put in a sprinkler system because it was too close to the property line, and we had to sprinkle the outside wall. And we just took down all the interior trims, stripped them down, had them reproduced where we needed more, and we just recreated this 1880s heritage house. And I thought I could run it off the bar. So my idea was that the phone rings, the bartender picks up the phone and answers, and he flips open the book and he writes the person's name down, and, well, the date and so forth. And I didn't really anticipate servers would be standing there drumming their fingers on the bar top waiting for their drink order while this guy's selling rooms. And like, yeah, that didn't work. So that led to then enclosing the area where provisions is, where we sell merchandise and chocolates and beer to go and all that kind of stuff, because we needed a front desk to manage these rooms. And then I was away on holidays, and the house next to us went up for sale. And so I arrived back and my brother said, "Hey, I bought you a house while you were away." And so that was the beginning of the garden suites. And he bought one side, and then very shortly after the other side came up. So that gave us an additional 4 rooms, so the 5 in the heritage house. And then we moved along and we moved into the building to the south of that, which was called Lime Bay House. But we never had control or ownership of that property. And so we ultimately moved out of that because we were just not comfortable with the tenure situation. And Iris, who lived next door, then banged on the door one day and says, "I'm going to sell my bungalow. Will you buy it from me?" And so that became the bungalow. So that got us back to 10 rooms.
That's awesome. Just how it all sort of organically just came up. And I guess once you did the first one, it's like, well, we're already in the game.
Well, we're already in the game. And it costs the same. So economy of scale kicks in. And what we do is different than what everybody else does, again. So we are a hybrid where, the rating agencies came and looked at Canada Select, came in the door, and they just didn't know what to do about us because we were not a B&B. We were classically not an inn. We're not a motel or a hotel. So we just called them guest houses. And it's an opportunity for people to come, and they can hang out with us as much or as little as they want to. The best part is that, coming in, we give them breakfast, but they don't have to wait for me to be there. They don't have to look at me in the morning. It's a good thing. And we just give people full breakfast. So take your pick. Anything on the menu.
That's awesome.
Go for it. Yeah.
That's way better than any place you can stay in.
Crawl home at night and you will not wear out the knees on your pants.
So one thing I did want to touch on was the fire.
The fire?
Oh, I guess fires.
Which one?
Yeah.
Third time's the charm.
Has there been 3 or just 2?
Just 2, but
Okay.
well, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So scared today, actually.
The first one, what was that like, trying to rebound from that?
It was a remarkable experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. You go ahead. You were here. I was away when it happened.
Yeah, he was on vacation. It was one of the most shocking, and I think I was the last person out of the building, just kind of making sure, clearing the rooms and such, and just seeing the smoke and such. But watching that day, and then those feelings and what came out of it, months later, of just seeing how much community and camaraderie became of that fire, and it was heartbreaking to watch, but in hindsight, it was incredibly beautiful what the city of Victoria did for us, what our team did for each other, and what Paul did for all of us. It was 6 months down the line, we bounced back. I think it was somewhere along that from November, but it was heartbreaking, and heartbreaking, and also just amazing, the community support and what came from that. Yeah.
And so, what was this? What do you mean by that?
I don't know, bounce back, but
I see.
We were back in business for lunch on the main floor 4 weeks to the meal.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, the wall.
And then we took another 6 weeks to get the top floor open again.
Okay.
So one of the challenges is, the cyclical nature of the restaurant industry. We really needed to be open for Christmas. So like the fire was on November 23rd, and we absolutely needed the revenue hit, which for us, but that period around Christmas and New Year's is like going back into midsummer. We actually make money again instead of losing money. So from my perspective, it was absolutely critical that we make this happen. And one of the really cool things that came out of the process was, and these people absolutely did not need to do this for us. And they were just like outrageously magnificent, generous, and it was very cool. But Downs Construction, the contractor that came in, actually employed our staff. We kept everybody on payroll, and we availed them to them to use as they could. And they kept them all safe, so nobody got hurt. Nobody hurt somebody else. And when this whole thing happened, as Paddy said, we were away. And the next day, my wife said, we should go home. And I said, no, we should stay here, because what I'm seeing people say is better than I could say. And we should let the management team be managers and let them do what they can. And we should finish our holiday, which was like another 4 days, and then go back. We're scheduled to be back in Victoria on a Monday. And we actually had a staff party planned for Monday night. And we planned on being closed that Monday night and going out and have a party. So when I came back in on Monday, I met with the insurance company, who immediately told me that we were underinsured. And I said, thanks for your time. I need to get to the hospital because I had a broken hand and I needed to have some work done on it. And I came back in that afternoon, and another restaurant in town that was closed gave us their space for the afternoon, and we had a staff meeting. And we had actually planned on rolling out an employee ownership plan that day. And we changed the agenda and just said, okay, you guys, whoever knows which end of the hammer you're supposed to hold over there, those who can help us out in other ways over here, and to the rest of you, you're all going to get paid, but it's not a holiday. So if you can't help in either of these two camps, then we're going to volunteer your time at the food banks and so forth. And we're going to do some community good here. And so we worked with everybody over the next 4 weeks to revamp manuals, to rethink how we do what we do, and to really just reconceive who we are and what's going on. And as Paddy said, we were surrounded by phenomenal support from the city. Van City was our lender, and they held fundraisers for us. The Island Chef Collaborative had fundraisers for us. Other restaurants offered us their restaurants because they close at 5 and we could have their place at nights. Just, things that were just unimaginable.
Yeah.
And I think everybody changed as a person in the process of doing this. And then at the same time, working with the contractor, we had people do extraordinary things that they would never normally do. And they understood the deadlines. And we had individuals who were project managers and who were superintendents and who were laborers who just went so far above and beyond to facilitate us getting back to business. Because as we came to learn, they all cared. And I think the fact that so many people cared about us had a massive impact on us. That it's just one of those things that until you go through it, you can't imagine the impact of it all. And we were fortunate that we had the tools to do it, that my background enabled us to expedite this thing. I knew the building inside and out. I knew how it worked. I knew how it was put together. And when I was watching the video on TV and saw the fireman at the top of his ladder wailing on a wall with an axe, and went, "No, not there. That's not the problem." But it is what it is. And the fact that the firemen came in and they took the boats down off of the mantelpiece, moved them across the room before they opened the hoses up and tried to put the fire out. I mean, they cared. And the fact that so many cared just blew us all away.
Yeah,
it was ridiculous.
I loved Victoria before that, and I was still relatively newish to the city, and that solidified it for me. That was just there's something special about the city, and that really showed it right there.
Yeah, it completely changed us all.
Yeah, that was round one.
That was the first one.
Yeah, that was the first one. Yeah, so a lot of good did come out of that then.
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's
unfortunate, of course, that it happened, but it sounds like there was a lot of growth.
We got the upper floor all rebuilt and everything.
The Phoenix of the fire type of situation.
Right, until we burned it out again.
Yeah. The Phoenix caught flame a second time.
Yeah, the second one hit then. That was this year.
Well, the second one happened the night that we closed. It was the night that Dr. Henry said that we should close all bars and restaurants because it's St. Patrick's Day and we need to manage this COVID thing. And we'd actually made the decision first thing that morning to close. So we kind of beat her to the punch. But I just handed one of our guys a belt sander and said, let's take advantage of this and sand down the bar top. And he did. And so the sandings from the bar top spontaneously combusted in the belt sander bag that night. And the same thing happened all over again.
Oh.
It wasn't too, it was more of this one
wasn't as extensive structurally.
Yeah.
But, we brought down the ceiling in the kitchen again, lots of water damage, smoke damage. We got new drywall everywhere, new flooring again. And
I've never seen a TV melt. And there was, it was there, all the TVs in the upper floor were.
So we met the next morning with the same claims adjuster and the same superintendent from Downs Construction. And they just said, you're going to use your guys to fix this? I went, nope. That's why it happened, because we're out of here. So you guys just come in and do it. So we all basically took a break. Mm-hmm. We all walked away. We went into lockdown. And I went out to Souk and pruned orchards and did stuff that I've actually never had time to do before. And it was until we got the kitchen back about 4 weeks later that I was able to start making call to people in the kitchen. The brewery people kept working all the way through and making beer and taking beer to market. And it was the fact that spring was coming and we needed to be buying food from farmers. Otherwise, they would have no market that motivated people to come back to work. And so again, it's that community. And, at the end of the day, what's a pub? A pub is a community hangout. It's a community living room. And I think that these episodes simply reinforce our position as a community living room. And our community is big. It's widespread. It goes all the way up island, extends to the mainland. There's a lot of people who, I have to keep telling people, think that they're regulars. They come here whenever they can, which might only be twice a year, but that's how they hold us. And we need to be ready for that. And it's interesting bringing new people in, especially front of house, trying to have them understand that there is this huge segment of population out there who holds us dearly in some fashion, and that they need to understand that these people come in the door with this set of expectations based on personal experience. And as a newbie, they need to figure out the kind of language that we use to make them comfortable, make it a continuous kind of experience.
It's that classic. I used to drink here when I was in college. I had my very first beer.
So many people. I met my wife here. It was our first date here.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just thousands of.
It's like a ridiculously common story.
Yeah.
Well, I love the term community living room.
Yeah,
I love that.
Well, that's what we are.
What does the future for Spinnakers look like? Is there anything upcoming that you've got planned, or?
I think as we continue to go down different divergent pathways, I have a mind that tends to wander, and if the people around me can keep up with some of the crazy ideas and find ways to embrace them and take them on and challenge them, there's really nothing we can't do. So 5 years ago, we started making cider. We took out a winery license, and that's been really fun. We are doing to cider what we did to craft beer. We, a year ago, kind of figured out what distilling actually looks like and how it actually works.
No one went blind. That was the best part about that.
Yeah. And so we've got just like a super interesting parade of distilled products coming. Sean Stool in reviewing our stuff has already said that he's astonished by the variety of products that we are making. And I think that's uniquely what we can do, because our point of sale is the bar. So we can make tiny batches.
Get to play
and we can play.
Yep.
And when we find something that we think really is cool and has a place in market, then we can ramp up production on it and take it to market. Mm-hmm. We are about to launch a line of craft sodas. We've got half a dozen that we're ready to put into tall cans and take to market. And again, it's just, it's an interesting collaboration where Chris Verhoeven, who had Victoria Craft Spirits, craft sodas.
Victoria Soda Works.
He realized in February that he wasn't going to make it. And he's got family. He's like, you need stability in your life. And I'd been looking for a while to get into that channel. And so he walked in our door, and I just said, let's just do this. I mean, this is awesome. This is fun. And we take what he knows how to do and we put it with our well. So we end up with a line of flavored mineral waters that, like, no sugar, no calories.
Tonics and sodas.
Tonics and sodas that go with spirits. The complexities, I think, just increase as time goes on.
I'm excited for that.
It just becomes more fun.
And just a gem of a human being, too. And we're super happy to have him part of the team.
And one of our biggest challenges is just physical space.
Yeah.
So, we were very, very fortunate to be able to acquire this warehouse over in Viewfield, which gave us, for now, 23,000 square feet to play with.
I can't, like 3 years ago, you guys didn't have this place. And I can't imagine, like, seeing how it is now and what's in here.
Oh, we wouldn't be able to do this.
Well, no, it just, where was all this stuff? And I know you said that it didn't exist, a lot of it.
Yeah.
But now, like, seeing it all here, I'm like, how do you not have this stuff?
Yeah.
Like, that just seems like radical growth very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, naturally, though. It kind of,
in a good way.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a good way.
In a very natural way. Yeah, absolutely.
And where do you see the craft brewing and all the different, like, the vinegars and all these craft things you're doing? Where do those go in the future? Do you see any new things coming on board?
It's hard to say in, like, the whole craft beer. Let's just say beer as an example of where it's going to go, because it's putting any type of projection on it I find it kind of silly. Like, this is the whole point of what we and everybody does in the craft beer, the North American movement, is what can we do? And so I find it more fun and exciting to see what people are coming up with and what we come up with than try to just benchmark and put a spot there. Like, we're going to do that. Like, it's not what we do. I feel as we kind of find new ideas all the time.
And I always end these things by asking, what is like the biggest lesson or takeaway that you've learned in your time working with food, alcohol, or whatever, working with the hospitality industry?
Oh, that's a good one.
What comes to mind? I figure that's a good way to end these things.
I think from a personal perspective, it's don't be afraid to try. Find the most fun people you can have to surround yourself with, and enjoy what each other's capable of bringing to the table. Celebrate where we live, the raw materials that we have access to. I just think we live in a very unique environment, both in terms of what the physical environment is and what the social climate is, and the influences that are becoming part of the fabric of what our society is. And there are certainly, challenges that are out there. I think we are here fortunate to be not as impacted as many are in other locations. And I think most of all, we need to celebrate who we are, what we have, share with each other, eat and drink each other's stuff. And
go buy that bottle from the other brewery. Go buy that bag of lettuce or something. Go out and support and help and celebrate. Absolutely.
That was one of the first things you said today, I think, that stood out to me, is this sort of commenting how it is everyone needs to lift each other up. That's how we all get better at what we do, and that's how we succeed.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Gentlemen, this has been amazing.
No, thank you.
Thank you very much. We're just under 2.5 hours right now.
Oh, okay. Not too bad.
So this has been amazing.
Excellent. Any more barrels you want to go pop open before we go?
So if people want to find out more about Spinnakers, where should they go?
Spinnakers.
Just go to the place?
Yeah.
Just come visit.
Of course, the website at spinnakers.com and check out our social media. But come down. Come say hello.
Everyone needs to come. There's something here for everyone, like legit.
Yeah.
And if you're looking for what I'm doing, you can go to VicFoodGuys.ca. I would appreciate it if you did give a like or subscribe or whatever platform you're consuming this. And I'll be back next Tuesday. I'll see you then. Bye.